Hello, bruvs. We're back with A Dream of Dracula in Search of the Living Dead by Leonard Wolf. A 1972 tome and rumination. Let's get this going. We got some nog. Let's get a drink of nog before I start. We got Satan blowing some hot air. Chapter 8, The Voivod and the Irishman. Whoa. Today, come on. Today, you pick up the trail of Bram Stoker's creation, Count Dracula, en route, hear a tape of the famous novel on arrival in Bistrita, a sightseeing tour of the town, and a drive to the Borgo Pass where Stoker's hero had his castle. The scenery is magnificent, to be sure your camera is handy. So be sure your camera is handy. From the Spotlight on Dracula tour folder, Pan American Holiday 494, 1972 and 73. Let's turn this off here. So there we go. Stoker, who was never there, needed the Transylvania looming in his mind. He needed a truly dreadful place in which to lodge his towering, wicked, overwhelming, lonely count. Let's bring close my drinks. I, driving my rented Volkswagen through the light filtering trees, needed the Transylvania to remember. The place of my childhood, the mythic place from which it has seemed to me I was snatched like a young ivy plant whose whole instinct is to climb the wall from which it is being torn. In the vicinity of Vesoul de Sus, near Bistritza, on a very high plateau, the rain suddenly stopped. The sun came out, and Romania, as if a film had been taken from my eyes, alone shone for a little while the brightness of a freshly lacquered painting with the brightness of a all right, so I can't read. With the brightness of a freshly lacquered painting. The clouds parted, trees glistened, a couple of cows ambled down from the green bank at the right of the road, and I stopped the car to reach for my Minolta. When I can, I steal scenes as well as people. Without warning, there were children coming from both sides of the road, shy, bright-faced, and also greedy, carrying tiny baskets made of freshly peeled birchbark filled to the brim with wild raspberries. 8 children, 10, shoving a score of tiny baskets in my face. Their smiles were shy, but there was nothing shy about their urging. They waved their hands, crying, "Buy, buy, buy." Like any good sensualist, I wanted to buy them all. In fact, I bought 4 baskets and ate the still wet berries as I headed east, letting my childhood images merge with the sweetness of these children whose language I could not understand. As for the berries, they were velvety and sour and tasted of the earth. At home, 2 years later, I have the bark baskets, dried out, redolent with children, sunlight, berries, and the distant odor of the mountains of Transylvania, the land beyond the forest. There is a scene early in Stoker's book in which the vampire Count, hey, look, there he is, both of them, where the vampire Count gives Jonathan Harker a thumbnail history of the Dracula clan. We Sescales, he says, in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. In his family, he boasts, is the spirit of the Ugric tribe, which bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, and the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame. Among his ancestors is Attila, whose blood is in these veins. Finally, he exalts an ancestor who as voivod crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground. This was a Dracula indeed. Indeed it was. His name was Vlad the Fourth, and he was a Wallachian prince who reigned over his war-torn principality at intervals over 30 years. 1448, 1456 to 62, 1476. Like Gilles de Rais in France, who was nearly his exact contemporary, he had passed down to us the double reputation of a great national patriot and a bloody-minded tyrant. What do you got, Brahms? Lord Eversley and Sir Valentine Kyrle say the prince, or voivod, as he was called, was one of the most cruel and bloodthirsty ruffians recorded in history. Ferdinand Cheville observes that, though Vlad was a man of undoubted military gifts, he is even better remembered as a leading figure in a long succession of perverse, bloody-minded monsters whose particular distinction lies in having given to Balkan history a deep tinge of crimson. Look at that stash. David Derrickson says simply that Vlad, sick, and I guess they used the double W for him, was an authentic sadist. It may be that here, as elsewhere, history and pathology served each other. The Wallachia over which Vlad ruled was a subject principally of the Ottoman Turks, but the Wallachians made uneasy vassals. From 1389, the date of the Christian defeat at the hands of the Ottomans at Kosovo, Wallachia, in Cheville's phrase, was hitched more or less helplessly to the Ottoman chariot. In such a context, Vlad IV, in his struggles against the Ottoman overlordship, may be seen as a national liberation fighter, as indeed Stoker's Dracula claims he was. Radu Florescu says that the fact that Wallachia, unlike her neighbors to the south, never became, in a strict sense, Turkish territory must be attributed in part to Dracula's 15th century crusading effort. However, Vlad IV's reputation for viciousness was not gained only by his military behavior against the Turks. Franz Babinger tells us that from the beginning of his rule, he was not only the terror of his subjects, but also to the neighboring states. Vlad's specialty was the impaling of his victims on long wooden stakes, and it is as Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepish, that he has come down to us. And there's a woodblock cutting of the unfortunates, and there's Vlad just chowing down on lunch while people are being staked. He was an unsavory fellow, if the reports about him are true. He reveled in the dying agonies of the prisoners and other victims whom he subjected to this cruel death. When some guest at a banquet expressed surprise that he could bear the odor emanating from the victims, the prince directed the immediate execution of his guest on a higher pale than the others, so that he might not be incommoded by the odor he complained of. The Impaler was a practical joker of agony. Reading about him 500 years after the events in which he figured, there is a leaden glow of gallows humor in the reports that, beginning modestly, he made away with 400 Transylvanians because they were preaching crusade, 600 merchants because they were too rich, and 500 nobles because they said he was too cruel. He was, though how much cruelty is enough is not specified. His solution to the problem of public begging, we are told, was to invite the beggars of the country to a dinner, in the course of which he fired the hall in which they ate. On one occasion, when a couple of Turkish ambassadors refused to doff their turbans, he nailed their headpieces to their foreheads. On another, he skewered an offending monk as well as his inoffensive donkey. No, With Tepish, as with Gilles de Rais, one has a sense of schoolboy cruelty put to the service of high-sounding goals. Babinger, writing in Germany in 1953, can hardly contain his outrage against Vlad IV's hangman trade, his unequaled bestiality. He calls him a monster who had thousands executed, speared, burned, or dismembered. Babinger tells us that Vlad's favorite form of amusement was to dine with his court at the center of a forest of tall palings on which were skewered his Turkish enemies. He flayed the soles of his prisoners' feet and rubbed salt into the raw flesh, after which, to multiply their death agonies, he had goats brought in to lick the salt. Jesus Christ. He was, according to Babinger, ingenious at contriving ways to hack people to bits, after which he seethed their flesh in kettles. He skewered the heads of babies to their mothers' breasts and fed broiled mothers to their children. As a Wallachian patriot, his military exploits included crossing the Danube with an army with which he devastated the surrounding Osmanian territory, burned all the settlements to ashes, and cut down the defenseless population, women and children included, and all those who were taken away as prisoners, not fewer than 25,000 people, it is alleged, were put to death by the stake. I will ban you if you don't shut up. I don't. I'm not here to be your bro. I'm here to read this motherfucking book. So pipe down and listen or get out. Get out! I'm going to have to block you in 3 seconds. Listen or go. Burned all the settlements to ashes and cut down the defenseless population. As a Wallachian patriot, his military exploits included crossing the Danube with an army with which he devastated the surrounding Osmanian territory, burned all the settlements to ashes, and cut down the defenseless population, women and children included. All those who were taken away as prisoners, not fewer than 25,000 people, it is alleged, were put to death by the stake. The catalogue of madness is both too extensive and finally, even for this hardened vampire historian, too repulsive for sustained attention. Muhammad II, the Impaler's Turkish overlord and enemy, a ruler habituated to bloody sights in a bloody century, found the stories of Vlad Tepish depredations so unbelievable that he thrashed the Grand Vizier, Mahmud Pasha, who reported them to him. In 1462, Vlad was finally driven from power, and his brother Radu, a voluptuous weakling and famous for his beauty, which was in great contrast to the ugliness of his brother, put on the Wallachian throne. Radu's beauty was said to have inspired lustful desires in Mohammed II. Vlad IV, another of history's very bad men, again, as with Gilles de Rais, the real monster has an unbelievable rawness, unmitigated by the kinds of meaning that accrue to the literary symbol. Imagined bloodthirst in a work of art can be made to have symbolic sense. The reality reeks and quivers, and we hear dismal groans. What the real thing can do, however, is to induce, on the part of at least one historian, a low-grade moral to a dreadful fable. Colonel Leon Lamouche, in phrases almost too familiar to be endured, tells us that Vlad was nevertheless an energetic, skillful prince, and his cruelty, which certainly was not always understandable, had at least the result that it made order reign in Wallachia, and it completely suppressed brigandage, brigandage, which before him was commonplace. Since I don't know what that is, I don't know how to pronounce it. Please stop. I cannot either recite for you, or say a few words for you, or give my name to you. Here, Bram. Bram, I say, he banged down on one of those little gongs, bells, sitting on the table. Then, as Bram made his appearance, Margaret Clement Scott, and we saw him act a symposium on the art of Sir Henry Irving. Stoker is the master of the commonplace style in which cliches flow as if they were impelled by the same pressure as genius. I don't say this lightly. There he is, Bram Stoker. Bram. Hello, Brams. There is a semi heroic everyman quality about his intense command of the mediocre, as if the commonplace had found a champion who could wear its colors with all the ceremony of greatness. When such a man just once is thoroughly afraid, the charade stops, and what you get is Dracula. Ludovic Flo. My dear Dracula is splendid, 1,000 miles beyond anything you have written before, and I feel certain will place you very high in the writers of the day. No book since Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or indeed any other at all, has come near yours in originality or terror. Poe is nowhere. Charlotte Stoker to her son Bram in Ludlum's A Biography of Dracula. The nog's gone. Bram Stoker eludes me. I have read his biography and nearly all of his books without being able to find a man I could clearly recognize or confidently describe. In Harry Ludlum's account of Stoker's life, the public facts are detailed, but the man himself remains shadowy. In Stoker's own writing, a person occasionally shows through, or better, is exposed, particularly in his later novels and, of course, in Dracula. There obtrudes the raw, harsh presence of a man endowed with nearly inexhaustible energy who is writing over, around, or under what he knows about loneliness and predominantly sexual terror. This is A Dream of Dracula by Leonard Wolfe. Stoker was born in Dublin in November 1847, the son of a petty civil servant and his strong minded, frequently pregnant wife. Bram, the third of 7 children, was so sickly as a child that until his 8th year he was bedridden, a fact which had much to do with making him a studious boy. Later, his health recovered. He was sent to Trinity College, Dublin, where he was expected to prepare himself for the civil service, but he was drawn, while still a student, to writing. An enterprising young man, he created a job for himself as an unpaid drama reviewer for the Dublin Mail, and he continued to write for the paper even after he took up his post as a civil servant. In 1872, Bram Stoker stood over 6 feet 2 in his stockings. Told you what it was called. And weighed over 12 stone, 168 pounds. I will tell you one last time. It is called The Dream of Dracula. Don't bother me. A rich auburn beard contrasting with his brown hair added to his strong presence. And he was as quick, confident, and big in conversation as in build. He was an impressive young man who, we are told, impressed Oscar Wilde's mother. Ludlum does not say, though. It would be interesting to know what young Wilde himself thought about him. Stoker's life until his 29th year seems to have been divided easily enough between his government work and his writing until his fateful meeting with Henry Irving. When that great actor came to Dublin in 1876, Ludlum writes that Irving was now 38 years old. Bram found him an awkwardly tall, spare man whose long hair swept back from a broad brow and flowed over the back of his collar, a lean, sensitive face, piercing eyes, bushy eyebrows. The actor, pleased by a review the young critic had written about his performance of Hamlet, responded warmly to Stoker's overtures. When Stoker reviewed Irving's performance a second time, the friendship bloomed, burgeoned, one should say. But before the story can be told, I want to intrude here some comment on a poem by Thomas Hood. Hood, famous as the Song of the Shirt poet, or Bridge of Sighs poet, if one likes, is also the author of another piece of melancholy called The Dream of Eugene Aram. It is not a very important poem, but it lends itself admirably to the sort of pathetic declamation that used once upon a time to be required of grammar school pupils when devoted spinsters were their only teachers. In my day, the favorite choices were Horatius at the bridge and an incident of the French camp. I am killed, sire, and, smiling, the boy fell dead. Dracula's great. The Dream of Eugene Aram tells how, in the prime of summertime, 4 and 20 happy boys leave their school room to play in a sunlit meadow. Remote from the carefree boys sit Eugene Aram, the usher, a melancholy man who much study had made. Very lean and pale and leaden-eyed, Eugene Aram closes the book he is reading, only to notice that, not far away, there is an urchin, engrossed in a book of his own that tells the story of Abel. The tormented Aram, smit with sudden pain, sits beside the boy and tells him about Cain and of the long tradition of murder that began with him. That history done, Eugene recounts his last night's dream in which he saw himself murdering an old man for his money, and scene after tormenting scene in which he tried, unsuccessfully, to dispose of the victim's body. Long before Hood's poem is done, the reader, if not the urchin, has guessed that Aram's dream was no dream. That very night, while gentle sleep, the urchin's eyelids kissed. The two stern-faced men set out from Lynn through the cold and heavy mist, and Eugene Aram walked between with Gibbs? What the hell are Gibbs? Gyves? Oh, is this supposed to be gloves? I have no clue what this says. With gyves upon his wrist. Even if Hood's poem were many times better than it is, one would still be perplexed by what happened to Bram Stoker and to Henry Irving when the actor read it as a gift to his new friend. Stoker tells us that it was on a Sunday evening, presumably at Irving's hotel. Yeah, see ya, bruv. And so after dinner, he said he would like to recite for me Thomas Hood's poem, The Dream of Eugene Aram. That experience I can never forget. Such was Irving's commanding force. So great was the magnetism of his genius. So profound was the sense of his dominance that I sat spellbound. Outwardly, I was as of stone. Here was incarnate power, incarnate passion. Here was indeed Eugene Aram as he was, face to face with his Lord, his very soul aflame in the light of his abiding horror. The awful horror on the murderer's face as the ghost in his brain seemed to take external shape before his eyes. After the climax of horror, the actor was able by art and habit to control himself to the narrative mood whilst he spoke a few concluding lines of the poem. Then he collapsed, half fainting. Irving, 38 years old and already a distinguished actor, was not, surely, in the throes of the easy feeling that The Dream of Eugene Aram exudes. What was the effect of the reading on Stoker? He is candid. I can only say that after a few seconds of stony silence following his collapse, I burst into something like hysterics. Let me say that I was no hysterical subject. I was no green youth, no weak individual yielding to a superior emotional force. I was, as men go, a strong man, strong in many ways. I was a very strong man. It is true that I had known weakness. In my babyhood, I used, I understand, to be often at the point of death. This early weakness, however, passed away in time. When I was in my 20th year, I was athletic champion of Dublin University. I was physically immensely strong. In fact, I feel justified in saying I represented in my own person something of that aim of university education, mens sana, in corpore sano, When, therefore, after his recitation I became hysterical, it was distinctly a surprise to my friends. For myself, surprise had no part in my then state of mind. Irving seemed much moved by the occurrence. I have quoted at length here for two reasons. First, this explosion of feeling marks the beginning of a relationship between Irving and Stoker that changed both their lives, and also because I want to convey something of Stoker's energetic unconsciousness about the true nature of manhood, which requires no such elaborate apology for the experience of falling in love, even when it happens between men. Irving, in any case, responded warmly to the occasion. Stoker writes that he went into his room and after a couple of minutes brought me out his photograph with an inscription on it. The ink still wet. My dear friend Stoker, God bless you. God bless you. Henry Irving, Dublin, December 3rd, 1876. Altogether, it was a stunning moment for them both, a moment about which I think it would be dangerous to make too sophisticated speculations. I am quite willing to believe that, as Stoker says, soul had looked into soul. There were more pragmatic results to follow. Not quite 2 years later, Bram Stoker, accompanied by his brand new wife, Florence, joined the actor in London to become Irving's acting manager. It was an exhausting job to be Irving's lusty, red haired Irish henchman, the most faithful, loyal, and devoted servitor he ever had. The tall, handsome, vigorous Irishman was henceforth a familiar figure before the doors of the Lyceum Theatre. Maybe what drew Stoker to the task, in addition to Irving, was the opportunity it gave him to move about in the cosmopolitan ambience of the glittering London that whirled around Irving. For a provincial young Irishman not thoroughly convinced of his own talents, there may have been some psychic nourishment in being always within sight and sound of greater men than himself. Irving's son Lawrence writes that to Stoker these illustrious patrons, whom he welcomed on their arrival in the foyer, were the breath of life. Irving, who dismissed them with his blessing from the stage, found that they made him depressed and nervous. Or, in addition to the excitement of the life of the theater, Stoker was pleased to find an outlet for the bureaucratic and organizational talents that had already prompted him to write a 248-page book on the duties of clerks in petty sessions in Ireland. 1879. Lawrence Irving tells us that the great actor's retinue of 54 included the players necessary for these productions and the key men in all the departments of stage management. The organization of this imposing caravan was left to Bram Stoker. It was the kind of work he thoroughly enjoyed and at which he excelled. Whatever the reason, it was a frenzied life in which he learned to usher 500 guests to a buffet supper on stage and to plan the itinerary for an acting company that would play 30 provincial towns in 5 months. For 27 years, if we are to believe Stoker himself, he answered 50 of Irving's letters every day. I think I shall be very well within the mark when I say that during my time of working with Henry Irving, I have written in his name nearer 500,000 than 250,000 letters. I need some tonic water too. In addition to better than a dozen books of his own, I do not know when Stoker found time to do them. He was the business manager of the most important theater in England, the secretary confidant of one of the most demanding egos of his age. He was presumably also a father and a husband, and yet he invented the time and compressed the energy needed to make lunges in the direction of fame. Somehow he bullied his mediocre literary gifts into such desperate motion that he surprised all expectation by stumbling into immortality. The novels before and after Dracula, while they are not unreadable, are not in any literary sense important, except as they shed light on Stoker himself. They are terribly sincere books, invariably sentimental. They breathe the human air of British decency. The men in them are except when they are villains, gallant or dutiful, or honorable, or long suffering or patient. The women are not particularly complex either, but there is a difference. Whatever the sum of their positive virtues is, Stoker's women are stronger, smarter, braver, and more believable than the men. Not only that, with a nagging frequency that has to be more than coincidental, their given names begin with the letter M: Maggie, Minna, Marjorie, Margaret, Mimi, though in a novel called The Man, the heroine's name is Stephen. Male and female, despite the smooth bodied sexlessness of his heroes and heroines, are very much on Stoker's mind. The men may be gallant and good, the women true and beautiful. Stoker's unwary intelligence is sweating or pretending not to sweat. Watch. In The Mystery of the Sea, the beautiful American incognito heiress Marjorie, who has been courted and won by Archie, a handsome young barrister, is about to be secretly married to him secretly in order to foil some Spanish desperadoes who want to kidnap her. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day before the wedding, Marjorie, dressed as a boy, meets Archie in a wood. They get on their bicycles and pedal for 3 hours from the vicinity of Cruden Bay to Aberdeen. Marjorie changes clothes, then they take a 6 hour train trip to Carlisle, arriving at 2 in the morning. 6 hours later, after resting in separate rooms, they meet at St. Hilda's Church, where all formalities were gone through, and Marjorie and I were made one. Then, though she looked oh so sweet, they take breakfast at the hotel and the 12:53 train for another 6 hour ride back to Aberdeen. After which, my wife and I got our bicycles and pedaled sturdily for 3 hours to Whinnyfold, Cruden Bay. Back in the wood in which the elopement began, Marjorie generously gives Archie a kiss and a hug that made his blood tingle. After which they part. Why, muses Archie, it was not like a wedding day or a honeymoon at all. Archie is doomed to spend his wedding night alone, hacking with a pickaxe at the rock floor of a cave beside the sea. I labored furiously. What I wanted was work, active work, which would tire my muscles and keep my thoughts from working into channels of gloom and disintegration. I worked hour after hour. When I stood up from my task, I was annoyed to see how little I had done. Gallant Archie, when he and Marjorie later are trapped in the same cave by the incoming tide, offers to lie down in the icy waters so she may stand on his body and thus escape what seems to be their doom. He is rewarded, our mouths met. If die we must, we should die together in a single kiss. They are saved, but they live through other curious moments, Archie tells us. I wanted to kiss her hand, but as I bent, her foot was temptingly near. I stooped lower to kiss it. She saw my intention and, saying impulsively, "Oh, Archie dear, not that wet, dirty shoe," kicked it off. I stooped still lower and kissed her bare foot. It should be said that Marjorie's is an extraordinarily intelligent foot. When she is being dragged off by her kidnappers, she uses it to tap out an intricate code signal whose marks in the dust give Archie and his allies instructions on how to reach her. At this distance from the Victorian milieu in which Stoker wrote, the unacknowledged sexual detail in the narratives is sometimes only funny, but there are occasions when a raw, dangerous breeze seems to blow over the pages of the text. Nowhere is that sense of rawness and danger more chilling than in Stoker's last novel, The Lair of the White Worm. Coming from a young man, this record of fear and fascination might make us wonder, but we might conclude that whatever the author's misery, it would surely pass. But Stoker was 64 years old when the book was published, and there is no way to ignore the signs of confusion and loneliness the narrative obtrudes. But first, a pertinent anecdote from Stoker's biography. It was Irving's standing joke that whenever there was a fire within range, Bram was off to it, hotfoot. On one occasion, a torch held by one of the Irving players in Hamlet set fire to a stage drapery. A stagehand rushed over, tore down the curtain, and trampled out the flames. But already In the smell of panic, some people had jumped from their seats, and one white faced young man dashed up the aisle. Bram, fearing a general stampede, caught him by the throat and threw him to the ground. Bram picked up the fallen man. Go back to your seat, sir, he told him sternly. It's cowards like you who cause death to helpless women. That's a man. Woman. The fascination and the fear of woman. In the lair of the white worm, she is the lady Arabella March, who moves with a quick, gliding motion among the snakes of Staffordshire. This damn nose. She was clad in some kind of soft white stuff, which clung close to her form, showing to the full every movement of her sinuous figure. Coiled round her throat was a large necklace of emeralds, whose profusion of color dazzled when the sun shone on them. Her voice was peculiar, very low and sweet, and so soft that the dominant note was of sibilation. Her hands, too, were peculiar, long, flexible, white, with a strange movement as of waving gently to and fro. She is the enemy, a huge serpent, ages old. She is also a woman who lives at the bottom of 1,000-foot hole that opens into her human habitation. To destroy her requires all the energy and devotion of Adam Sultan, another of Stoker's gallant young men. Unlike the hapless Archie of the Mystery of the Sea, who had only a pickaxe to aid his manhood, Adam has the help of the most modern explosives. Just the same, fighting the serpent, as he learns, is not easy. Even in her woman's form, she is ferocious. She tears one mongoose to bits with her bare fingers and shoots another dead. When Oolonga, the black servant of Edgar Caswell, a rich gentleman of unsound mind, too fervently expresses his love for the serpent woman, she drags him, her white arms encircling him, down into the noisome depths of her hole. Adam, rushing from the scene, slips on the steps in some sticky, acrid smelling mass, and falling forward, felt his way into the inner room where the well shaft was not. That damned well shaft, it has a queer smell, yes, like bilge or a rank swamp. It was distinctly nauseating. Stoker is insistent. The smell was like nothing that Adam had ever met with. He compared it with all the noxious experiences he had ever had: the drainage of war hospitals, of slaughterhouses, the refuse of dissecting rooms, the sourness of chemical waste, and the poisonous effluvium of the bilge of a waterlogged ship, whereon a multitude of rats had been drowned. I should perhaps have said earlier that the hole descends into the ground at a place that used to be called Diana's Grove, where once there had been a Roman temple to that goddess of the hunt and chastity, which may explain why poor Adam finds that we are in an exceedingly tight place. Our first difficulty is to know where to begin. I never thought this fighting an antediluvian monster would be such a complicated job. Adam, like the young men in Dracula, has an older adviser, Sir Nathaniel, who, in addition to counseling young Adam, is asked by his young protege to propose to the beautiful Mimi for him, a task he performs creditably enough, though why it should have been necessary, Stoker does not make clear. In any case, Sir Nathaniel's advice to Adam is that the serpent being feminine, she will probably overreach herself. Now, Adam, it strikes me that, as we have to protect ourselves and others against feminine nature, our strong game will be to play our masculine against her feminine. Lady Arabella as a serpent looks like this. It is so huge that its two eyes make a green light. At the summit of what seemed to be a long white pole, near the top of which were two pendant white masses, like rudimentary arms or fins, by degrees, as their eyes got their right focus, they saw an immense towering mass that seemed snowy white. It was tall and thin, the hidden mass at the base of the shaft was composed of vast coils of the great serpent's body, forming a base from which the upright mass rose. Adam and Sir Nathaniel, when they see this thing coming toward them, hurry away. Inexplicably, Lady Arabella sells Diana's grove to Adam and then confides to him that she has always wanted to know the depth of her well hole. She wonders if Adam would mind measuring it for her. Adam, says Stoker, was really happy to meet her wishes. By now, my plot summary is beginning to sound ridiculous and may already be tasteless. Let me bring the matter to an end by saying that Adam fills the hole with dynamite, over which he causes many yards of sea sand to be poured. When a spark caused by lightning explodes his charges, the house at Diana's Grove with the worm in it collapses. From the well hole, agonized shrieks were rising, growing ever more terrible with each second that passed. Once, in a sort of lull or pause, the seething contents of the hole rose, and Adam saw part of the thin form of Lady Arabella, forced up to the top amid a mass of slime. The explosions, the destruction go on, convulsion after convulsion. Stoker, less tender to his readers than I mean to be to mine, spares no moistly squirming detail that will let us know that Adam has destroyed all that stinking, slimy, nasty stuff once and for all. When the spasms have at last subsided, Adam's aged uncle, who reappears at the book's end for the occasion, says to his nephew and his young bride, "I think it is quite time you young people departed for that honeymoon of yours." There was a twinkle in his eye as he spoke. Mimi's soft, shy glance at her stalwart husband was sufficient answer. I don't know. I don't know. Harry Ludlam, speaking of the lair, says the overall feeling was of some deep mystery between the lines, the mystery of the mind of the man who wrote it. Stoker, the elusive and I surmise most lonely mystery maker, died in April of the year following its publication. Ludlam's remark has the ring of an epitaph. And that's the end of chapter 8. 42 and a half minutes. And there's Wolf. Wolf! Wolf! Wolfhead! That's all, bros. Goodbye.